Right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this village board meeting to order on Monday, July 2nd, 2018, and ask if you would please rise and join the village board in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Scaletta.
Here.
Trustee Glasgow.
Here.
Trustee Blackwood.
Here.
Trustee Tinaglia.
Here.
Trustee Rosenberg.
Here.
Trustee LaBedz.
Here.
Trustee Sidor. Trustee Baldino.
Here.
President Hayes.
Here. First item on the agenda is the approval of minutes. We have two sets to approve tonight from June 18, 2018. The first is the Committee of the Whole minutes. Any changes or passes?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion to approve by Trustee Blackwood, second by Trustee LaBedz.
Pass.
Passed by Trustee Scaletta. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And next, the minutes from the same evening's village board meeting. Any changes or passes?
Pass.
Passed by Trustee Scaletta.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion to approve by Trustee Rosenberg, seconded by Trustee Blackwood. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And next, we move on to the approval of the accounts payable, and I call on Trustee Rosenberg.
Thank you, President Hayes. I'd move approval of the warrant register with a check date of June 30th, 2018 in the amount of $4,108,491.91.
Second.
Motion to approve by Trustee Rosenberg, second by Trustee Glasgow. Any questions or comments from the board? Anything from the audience? Seeing none, roll call.
Trustee Rosenberg.
Yes.
Trustee Glasgow.
Yes.
Trustee LaBedz.
Yes.
Trustee Tinaglia.
Yes.
Trustee Scaletta.
Yes.
Trustee Blackwood.
Yes.
Trustee Baldino.
Yes.
President Hayes.
Yes. Well, next in the agenda, we move on to recognitions and presentations. And we do have a special presentation tonight. And so we are so thankful for the Salute organization to be here, well represented here today. And also the Picket Fence Realty, including their owners and founders. Can I call you that? Sue and Paul Duchek. And this relates to the Mayor's Challenge. And I have run probably hundreds of races over the course of my lifetime, running races, but never been good enough to win any money myself. And so I thought, as I was running one morning, how could I use my legs to help others make money? And so the Mayor's Challenge was kind of born out of that idea. And so I was very happy to be able to utilize whatever skills I do have to be able to help out a very, very worthwhile organization, and that's Salute, Inc. And one of their founders, Mary Beth Beiersdorf, is here today. Mary Beth and her husband, Will, founded the Salute organization 15 years ago now. This is their 15th anniversary. An organization founded right here in Arlington Heights that has benefited for the past 15 years injured military personnel and veterans and their families. And so this is an organization that is near and dear to my heart as a military veteran myself. And so it just seemed like a very great idea to put the two together. And so that's really the foundation of the Mayor's Challenge. This resulted in many individuals coming out to take up that challenge over the course of the Salute 5 and 10K back in Memorial Day this past May. And so we can't thank all the participants enough. But in addition to my own personal challenge, the business community took up the challenge as well. And I'll let Paul and Sue Duchek explain how that happened. But for the time being, if all of the individuals with us tonight could join me up front. And so before we actually present this and explain the significance of it, as I said, the challenge mobilized our business community. It's really reflective of the community that we have, both our residents and our businesses working together towards common goals. And I'll let Sue and Paul explain how that came about.
Okay, so this was kind of a fun thing. We had actually read about it in the Daily Herald about the challenge. We'd heard about it previously, and Paul said, "You know what? We should do something. We should match Tom's donation." And so we have, for both our dads, and we have family in the military. We thought, why not see if we couldn't tap into some other businesses, local businesses, because there's such generosity. So with just, I don't know, was it 2 weeks? We spread the word, and there was not one person I asked that said they couldn't participate. So it was a matching funds. It was last year it was about $250 and was maxed out at $500. So it was up to Tom to lead the charge. But collectively, 27 businesses and individuals came out, and we were able to come up with some nice money for Salute, which we so appreciate, and such a worthy cause.
Thanks, Sue. So just to explain the numbers, my portion, there was 49 people that beat me in the 5K on the Salute 5K run over Memorial Day weekend. So my portion was a $5 match for the 49 people who beat me, rounded up to $250. So my portion is very small of this $7,000. But again, the business community really rallied behind this challenge. And as I said, it's very much reflective of not only the sincere desire of our businesses to give back to their community, but also reflective of the great mission that Salute Inc. has had over the past 15 years and all of the great work that they do for our military veterans and their families. And so we can't thank you enough for all of you do. I know it's a big organization with a great deal of heart and involved in many, many different things. And so we thank you for your commitment to Arlington Heights, but especially all of our veterans nationwide and even worldwide. So again, we would like to present this on behalf of myself and the business partners who partnered with me in this challenge, this $7,000 check to Salute Inc., and I know you will put it to good use, so congratulations. Mary Beth, you can say a few words.
Short of inviting every high school track team to participate in the event, Tom is just an incredible. I want to thank you for your service to our country and service to this wonderful community, as well as you and Paul, Sue, and coming up with this idea. Salute would not be around, literally, if it wasn't for this community. So I found it fitting we'd like to present you today with just a token celebrating 15 years, a little paperweight, and also Sue put it in your office, but just a reminder that it took all of us to do this, to come forth. Will and I might be the drivers of the bus, but everybody's gonna get on and ride the destination with us. So I really thank our staff, our board members, and our community of volunteers that really keep Salute running. So thank you very much, really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Right, we have no other recognitions or presentations tonight, so we will move on to citizens to be heard. And we do have a number of citizens who wish to be heard tonight. And the first is Paul Marcy. And Mr. Marcy, I just remind you of the 3-minute time limit that we have for citizens to be heard.
Okay.
And if you just state your name, if you would.
All right. My name is Paul Marcy. I live in the courts of Russellwood area. I've got a corner house there. Moved there about middle of 2015. So the reason I'm here, I wanted to bring to your attention a problem that I need your help with. I believe I've copied a number of you recently on an email concerning a traffic issue. And I didn't do it to be a nudge. I wanted to raise it to your concern because The problem has been out there a long time, and here's the problem. Russellwood Drive is a very winding street. It's an extremely winding street where there are a lot of, I guess you call them blind-sided areas when you're making a turn. And we moved there in 2015. As a result, I just happened to see recently 2 cars drag racing. I've seen a car go off the road and hit a tree. And I seen in April a young boy coming from MacArthur on a bicycle almost get hit by another car. So what's the problem? The problem is it's the traffic coming from Hersey High School. Hersey High School acts as a feeder into Russellwood Drive. And consequently, you've got some young drivers that use this as a fast thoroughfare to cut through without having to go to Thomas and without having to deal with the traffic by the high school. So we get a lot of people that drive recklessly on the street. In the email was, I think it was dated June 14th. In the email, we put out some suggestions, and we wanted to try and get you folks to try and raise it for your consideration. Look at this area as a traffic issue, traffic safety issue. It's a big concern because all the people that live on Russellwood Drive see the potential dangers, but for some reason or another, it hasn't been elevated within the village to be addressed properly. So there are simple solutions. I don't have the time to go over them with you. We did try to lay out some ideas, some solutions that would be simple, very costly is not the issue. These are very reasonable suggestions, so we just need somebody to address it and elevate it. So that's what I wanted to try and bring to your attention today. If there's any way that this could be elevated for your consideration and thorough review, we'd appreciate it very much. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Marcy. And I know Mr. Coughlin is talking about the same issue, so
Yes.
if you'd come forward.
Oh, okay, sure.
And it's David Coughlin, right?
Yes, right. My name is Dave Coughlin. I live next door to Paul, and we both have views of Russellwood Drive. I've lived at this address since 1985, and it's been an ongoing problem for all of those 33 years. It's a very brief period of time, depending on when the kids get out of school. For about 20 minutes after dismissal time at Hersey High School, I'm going to guess there's maybe 24 cars that are students that drive through our residential area. And out of those 24 kids, there's probably a handful who'll either, as Paul said, drive recklessly or they're driving too fast. And 3 other neighbors have lived next to me, as Paul has done, and they've all had the same problem. The neighbor of mine who lives just west of me on Brockton Court, they've had 2 changes of residence there, and they've also complained about the exposure of their yards to the kids coming around Russellwood Drive, right at that critical point from roughly Bradshire Court up to Haverhill. There's a couple of curves, and the kids love it. It's like a Le Mans course. And I understand it's springtime, or if it's fall, the kids are excited either getting out of school and going on to job or getting home. And as Paul said, that's somewhat of a shortcut getting through. So we both are asking we don't know where to go within the village to get the help we need to try to get some more frequent and consistent traffic enforcement by the police department. All a police officer would have to do would be to show up for maybe 10 or 15 minutes twice a month with a cruiser somewhere on Russellwood Drive for the kids coming through to see it. And I think that would begin to get the message through that they're being watched, and there'd be some better control over that. Maybe signage, perhaps. We had one of the traffic engineers recommended double striping down the middle of Russellwood Drive to indicate which side of the road you're on. And there have been some concerns from the Homeowners Association about the aesthetics of striping. And I think the safety issues are far more critical than the aesthetics. Kids coming from Sullivan Elementary and from MacArthur Middle School walk Russetwood Drive right in that area, getting home from school. And if one of those cars jump in a curb, which has happened repeatedly, God forbid there would be a child walking there or someone walking their dog. So just looking for some help. We're looking for names or contacts and how to navigate through the village. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Coughlin. Mr. Recklaus.
Okay.
I was just going to say that this issue, it's been elevated to my level as village manager. And believe it or not, I actually had a conversation. I had my normal one-on-one meeting that I have with the police chief today at 11 o'clock, and we discussed the emails. And there's been a fair amount of back and forth between Mr. Marcy and our traffic engineering unit, and then also internally between traffic engineering and our traffic unit and our police department, talking about some of the suggestions that Mr. Marcy had. So what we're looking at, and I should be in a position to make a formal response to Mr. Marcy, and I'll copy the board later this week, is we're looking at all of the traffic accident history along Russetwood Drive, as well as the 11 cul-de-sacs that intersect Russetwood over the last several years. We're looking at basically the street geometry. You know, are they contributing to issues beyond what we normally would see in this type of neighborhood? And obviously the presence of the school. And I think what we have to do, and this is the difficult part, is the suggestions that were made, are they seen to be effective measures to address the issues that were raised? And sometimes traffic things, when you look at them, the solutions are sometimes counterintuitive. And so we're looking at that because we don't want to, we generally try to avoid just throwing up signs and that type of thing when we don't think it's going to be effective. And with 260 miles of road that we maintain, there's a lot of experimentation that's done over the years. But we are looking at it in earnest, and it's at my level, and I will be sending out an email later this week to Mr. Marcy and everyone else who's copied that to resolve those issues. But it is difficult, and I think that we are looking at it.
Thank you for those comments, Randy. I would think that perhaps some communication with the school would also help, just in terms of anything that they might be able to do to discourage cut through and other types of traffic in that area. But thank you for the report, and thank you for bringing this to our attention. All right, we have one other individual who wishes to address the board on Citizens to be Heard, and that's Jacqueline Perkins Jordan. Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. I'm here this evening on what I consider a very simple problem, and that's parking in what I've now found out is Minor Street, where Gumright High restaurant is. I did not know it was part of this street. I go to Gumright High to eat. I visit with friends there, and one day I stayed over 2 hours and I got a ticket. I do not believe that I believe this is a chilling effect on the commercial business in downtown Arlington Heights, that someone cannot sit in a restaurant and visit with friends without getting a ticket. Now, since this is part of the street, may I suggest to whomever that you put meters there so that if we stay more than 2 hours, we get a ticket for that. But just having what appears to be a parking lot and a sign that I never saw, but a sign that says no longer than 2 hours is not sufficient. I don't know if you've ever heard of this problem. It's probably not something that people think that they need to bring to your attention, but whomever is in charge of mapping the streets, taking care of legal problems, I would ask that you look at it, because you can put a meter there, you can just put meters there, and then we have to pay, and then we understand that. Now, the other thing I found out was when I went back to Gumright High and I asked them about this, they told me that they pay the village for the use of the customers parking there. I don't know. I have no way of proving that. you people should know whether that's true or not. And if that's true, that's a double insult to us, the customers, who park there longer. So I'm asking you if there's anything you can do about that. I would hope there's something you can do about it to make it more fair. Then I would ask you to do that. I think it's quite a quixotic request of mine, but I'm still making it, so I'm on the record. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. And I think you characterized the problem as a simple one. It's anything but. And just so you know, you're not the only one who has voiced a concern. So we've heard this for many, many years, and that's a problem that we've been trying to deal with the help of individuals like yourself who provide suggestions about how we can best deal with it. So there's a lot of competing interests. You expressed one of them, the right to go into a business and visit with your friends, but we also have to respect the rights of the business owners for their customer clientele to turn over. And so if someone's staying in a parking spot for 4 or 5 hours, then they don't have the opportunity to turn that business over. So there's a lot of competing interests, but we've heard you. We've heard others who voiced the same concern, and we've attempted to implement solutions to these problems over the years, and we're doing that now, in fact, looking at ways to address these issues. And so, Mr. Reckles, do you have any further comments?
I was just going to say that, well, first of all, thank you for patronizing Dr. But secondly, your timing is actually impeccable. We're right now in the middle of doing a study of parking regulations and capacity in downtown Arlington Heights. One of the things we are looking at is those types of restrictions, looking at signage, is it effective enough? And Mayor Hayes is correct that, one of the challenges is if you have too long a period of time that someone can park, those spots become tempting for employees of downtown businesses because they can just kind of sit there all day. And then if it's even longer, even commuters. And so it's difficult to manage that window because you want to keep most of the prime spaces for customers, but at the same time, we certainly don't want situations like you experienced where someone had to have their visit cut short. So it is a balancing act. We actually do not charge our businesses for public parking. That's something that's just paid for by the village. And so the person spoke but like I said, your timing is impeccable. And we do right now on our website have a survey open where anyone can comment on their experiences in downtown. And so I would encourage you to fill out that survey as part of the process.
Thank you again for coming. I have no other blue cards for items not on the agenda. So we'll move on then to old business, and we do have a number of items to report out. First, from the meeting of June 11, 2018, and I first call on Trustee Rosenberg.
Thank you, President Hayes. I would move, as I did the night of June 11th, to recommend to the village board that the 12-month period ending December 31st, 2017 comprehensive annual report be accepted.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Rosenberg, second by Trustee LaBedz. Any questions or comments from the board? Anything from the audience? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And next, from the Committee of the Whole meeting from June 25, 2018, I'd first call on Trustee Glasgow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move now, as I did then, that the Committee of the Whole recommend to the village board that the board approve the proposed 2019-2023 capital improvement program, and that the first year of the program totaling $28,469,200 be incorporated into the village proposed 2019 budget.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Glasgow, second by Trustee LaBedz. Any questions or comments from the board? Anything from the audience? Seeing none. Do we need a roll call on this? No. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And then finally, from that same meeting, Trustee Baldino.
Thank you, President Hayes. I would move, as I did then, that the board approve the 2019 budget ceilings of $76,177,200 for the general fund and $21,209,500 for the water and sewer fund.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Baldino, second by Trustee Rosenberg. Any questions or comments from the board? Anything from the audience? We do have Mr. Moen. So, Mr. Mons, if you come forward now.
Thank you, President Hayes. Yes, at the Committee of the Whole meeting last Monday, right here, June 25th, the board recommended to approve, like we are right now in old business, the 2019 village budget ceiling of $76,177,200, which potentially includes a village tax levy increase of about 2.5%. Now, this is slightly above the village 8-year average of around 2% if we go back to 2011. But in my unprofessional kind of opinion here, this 2019 budget estimate is based upon a reasonable and a sound forecast, I think, for the revenues and expenses until year end. That giving, during the last half of this year, I would ask the board and the staff if they could do whatever possible to reduce that tax levy increase before we get it into the final budget. Every penny counts to many residents in town. It really does. I also want to give credit to where credit's due, and that's to you, President Hayes, who at last Monday's Committee of the Whole meeting, you encouraged public participation and engaged the group during both the capital improvement program discussion and through the budget discussion. Therefore, I would also encourage anyone that might be paying attention to this, that is, if there is anyone, to attend the Committee of the Whole meetings on November 14th and 15th of this year, or call your favorite board member to engage in this budget discussion. I think together, if we can bring forth ideas and suggestions, that'll help us all better to utilize our limited tax dollars. Thank you, President Hayes.
Good points, Mr. Mowens. Thank you. All right, seeing no other members of the audience who wish to comment on this agenda item, we do have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, no other old business, so we move on then to the consent agenda. Are there any members of the board who wish to remove an item on the consent agenda? Seeing none, are there any members of the audience who wish to remove an item on the consent agenda? Seeing none, are there any members of the board who wish to vote no or pass on any items on the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
By Trustee Glasgow, seconded by Trustee LaBedz. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, roll call.
Trustee Glasgow?
Yes.
Trustee LaBedz?
Yes.
Trustee Rosenberg?
Yes.
Trustee Blackwood?
Yes.
Trustee Baldino?
Yes.
Trustee Tinaglia?
Yes.
Trustee Scaletta?
Yes.
President Hayes?
Yes. Move on then to new business, and we do have one item tonight. That's a planned unit development amendment for a parking variation for the business at 1540 North Arlington Heights Road. Is the petitioner present? Why don't you come forward, just introduce yourself if you would.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the board. Carlos Arevalo of Smith Amundsen on behalf of the petitioner and property owner.
Okay. Any introductory comments before the staff? Not a full presentation, but anything? Trustee Tinaglia.
Right. I wanted to make a comment that while I'm not involved with this project or this petitioner in any way, my firm is working on a very, very small project within this building, a little interior renovation. So I think it's appropriate for me to sit quietly on this and not comment on it.
Okay.
Okay. Also with me is Tyler Reynolds, who's of the property manager. Ryan Company's with me, so he's attending. So
Okay, why don't you proceed?
Mr. Mayor,
thank you.
point of order. Is Trustee Tinaglia, are you recusing yourself, or you just?
Yes, I'm not gonna vote.
I think
Yeah.
by the rules, you have to leave the room.
Well, I don't think he has to leave the room.
No, I'm not,
We got-
not the petitioner.
I just want to make sure we're doing it right, that's all. Okay, so he can sit, we've always traditionally had the person, wait, that's the only reason I was asking.
Only if that petitioner is that person. I have nothing to do
Oh,
with the petitioner.
I have no problem with it either way, I just want to make sure we're following the rules the right way. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you. As I have brought a presentation with me that I submitted to the village staff. This is an amendment to the PUD ordinance 89-100. And what it pursues is a parking variation, a couple of variations with respect to the parking requirements of that ordinance. The property that we are looking at is located on the southwest corner of North Arlington Heights Road and Mott Avenue. The building at the property is a medical facility. It's a facility that is actually made up of 3 separate tenants, and they are two medical uses that are applicable to or that are by Northwest Medical Community, I believe is the name of the tenant, and also an eye doctor. One of the facilities contains just doctor's offices. The other one is or the medical offices. The other one is a physical therapy type of facility. When the property was first approved in 1989 and subsequently developed in 1990, it consisted of 17,745 square feet. There was an additional potential loft space that would have amounted to approximately 4,700 square feet. That was not built up right away. It took some time for that to happen, and eventually only a part of it was built out. So the total square footage that is usable for purposes of the uses is approximately 19,579. The property at the time of development contained, let me just move forward, there's a plan of the property, 77 parking spaces. The 77 parking spaces were appropriate for an office use, and there were some conditions in the ordinance with respect to that. However, at the Plan Commission and the planning process, it was determined that potentially the property, based on its location and on the zoning and the uses, could potentially have also medical uses. And it was noted during the Plan Commission process that it could possibly, the medical uses could occur, and that would have an impact based on the ordinances and the parking requirements, potentially have an impact as to the number of parking spaces required. However, the ordinance was adopted simply to make reference as to the parking issues, that they would have to deal with a couple of two spaces that would be removed and two landscape islands to be provided. So what seems to have occurred over the period of time is that at some point in time, rather than primarily office use, the property, sort of given market conditions, I suppose, migrated to more of a medical use. And that has had the impact of increasing the parking requirements beyond the 77 spaces that were provided. Based on my discussions with village staff and the history of the property, it appears that in light of the fact that this were medical offices improvements, there was no need to obtain permits or no need to go to the village board and essentially inform staff this is what we're doing, such that the parking issue would have been, the village would have become aware of it much earlier. I think it's not only within the last 4 or so years when my client, the property owner of the property at this point in time, I believe wanted to sell the property, that it became clear that there was some sort of concern or some issue with the parking. And so the property owner became aware of the parking deficiency. Given that information, then we were asked to come before the village and make a application to make sure that we were compliant or to address the parking deficiency. In addition to, let me just move forward to some of the other. In addition, in anticipation to the application, we were asked to conduct certain parking studies in order to determine the actual use and the loads, parking loads on the property. Apparently, approximately 8 years ago or thereabouts, there have been some issues with parking, and there was a lot of parking in the neighborhood that the users of the property were having. And so there were complaints that were brought out to the village's attention and to the property owner. And as a result of that, there were certain measures that were taken by the occupants of the property in order to address the parking. What we determined based on the parking studies that were conducted was that, and I'm sure you can see in the report and also through the staff report, that the parking now has been addressed, the insufficiencies through not only use of parking on the street, the parking on the site, but also through off-site parking arrangements that the property, the occupants have secured. In light of those parking arrangements, the usage and the rate of occupancy of the parking on the property has become somewhat manageable, but it's necessary to maintain those parking arrangements, because otherwise we would be, the property would be using more parking than it's presently or currently on the site. And the use and the property is really built out, so there is not an opportunity to address the parking issues except through these parking arrangements. So what the staff asked us to do was to have the parking studies to determine what the actual loads were. Those were conducted over several days during business hours to properly ascertain the number. We were also asked to conduct parking studies of the neighborhood in the area. One of the concerns that came up during the conceptual planning process was that there might have been some parking issues on Evergreen. Our engineer conducted the parking studies and determined that during the times that the studies were conducted, that there were no parking on Evergreen Avenue, and of the parking available on Maud, which is the street right across from the property for the public spaces there, those were used by the employees and were used to capacity. So in addition to conducting the parking studies, we also determined and learned that the property owner entered into arrangements with Our Savior's Lutheran Church, which is provided certain distance south of the property, and they are able to utilize up to 20 spaces from Monday through Friday, and there is a shuttle that drives the employees, and this is primarily for employees because they're the ones who are there all the time. They want to open up the spaces for the patients coming in, and so those are the ones at the property. But for the folks that get to park over at the church, they get shuttled back and forth at the beginning of the day or whatever their schedules are, and there's an arrangement that has been secured with the church. Of the usage in the church, it was also determined that we needed to do parking studies for that, and those were conducted, and you can see the percentage and the highest occupancy rates and their loads that are not really impacting the parking there. Staff felt comfortable based on their own observations as well that those were, reasonable and would not adversely impact the parking of the facility at the church. Similarly, the property owner or the property occupant has an arrangement with Glucker Funeral Home, and they use 12 spaces in their facility, in their parking, and that is immediately south, so it's within walking distance. It's the next property over south. And so they use 12 spaces for that. There's no specific restrictions, and it is, as I mentioned, walking distance from the city. So in an effort to address, the petition is for a variance for the parking to deviate from the requirement, which would have been 99 spaces. There's 77 on the property. Making that request, our understanding was that staff was not willing to allow for a variance of that requirement, rather, because of the potential use and the fact that we did not have a sufficient number of parking on the property. And so instead, we discussed the potential avenue of having variances that would allow us to have this off-site parking arrangements. And so the variances before you are for the purposes of obtaining relief from the ordinance to be able to have the off-site parking arrangements with Glucker and with the church as it is, or in the event that those were to go away, to have alternatives. The recommendation by the Plan Commission and also through staff was to recommend that variance being granted, subject to the conditions that are listed in the staff report. And we certainly are, obviously as the condition of the building there's not much we can do about it. It's the relief we are seeking in order to be able to continue to operate. The only concern that we had with respect to the condition, particularly having to do with the arrangements, is that at least in the way it reads, and if I just may pull that up. The condition reads that if the existing parking agreements with the Glucker Funeral Home or Our Savior's Lutheran Church are discontinued, the petitioner does not secure new substantially similar parking agreements at the discretion of the village, then the petitioner shall be deemed non-code compliant and shall not renew leases for medical tenants and shall only re-tenant spaces with general office until such time as the parking requirement is met. Our only concern with the condition as worded has to do with the seemingly limitation on no medical use, that you would only have to have either general office and not have any medical use at all, and the suggestion that it might potentially prevent the user from being able to have partial medical use. I would want to make sure that the condition was clear so that it would be possible, obviously, if we were to have medical use and to have office use, the number of spaces would be reduced. So, for instance, if we were to if the square footage on a facility was reduced to have, I'm trying to, hold on a second here. Just misplaced my notes for a second. The parking for medical use, according to your ordinance, is that one space for every 200 square feet. For regular offices, one space for each 300 square feet. And so if we were to be able to secure one of those tenants to be something less than, or to be office use, potentially, we would be able to reduce the overall requirement. So we're trying to make sure that we have that flexibility, that clearly the goal is to be compliant with the ordinance, to be compliant with the code and your requirements with respect to parking. But I would not want to have the condition read in such a way that it might limit our ability to have partial medical. So that really is the effort. And what we're trying to do is obviously become code compliant to make sure that the property is able to continue to operate and to be able to be compliant with the parking requirements of the village and to address the deficiency.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm obviously available for questions.
Let me go to staff first for anything that they have to add.
Yes, if I can just start by answering that question that the petitioner raised. The property right now has 77 spaces, and that exceeds codes if it was just general office, but it's under code if it's all medical. So the intent of the condition is that they would have to reduce a sufficient amount of medical office, release that as general office until they met code, and that's why the language says the parking requirements meet code. So generally speaking, they could have between 6,000 and 7,000 square feet of the building be medical office and the remainder general office, and they would be right around the 77 spaces that they have on site if those off-site parking arrangements go away. So very quickly, the Plan Commission discussed this, and there were three options really. One would be to deny the initial request for the parking variation to go from 99 spaces to 77, and then not approve the other variations to allow them to have off-site parking, and then those businesses that are in that building now would be then forced to relocate, or some of them. We try to find a way where their existing tenants, they moved in there. Medical offices is exempt by the state statute from receiving a business license from the village, so they probably went in at some point without coming to the village for a business license, and that's why we're in the situation that we're at, and maybe the prior property owner was not aware of those requirements. And then the third option was to try to come up with an arrangement where they could get the spacing variations to allow the off-site parking, both in a residential district, which is currently not allowed, and also to exceed the 1,000 foot spacing limit from the property, and then add some conditions to allow that if those agreements go away, then they either have to supplant them with a comparable agreement from some other property, subject to our review, or they would have to reduce the amount of medical office on site. So that was the intent of trying to kind of plan it this way. The Plan Commission did also concur and recommended denial of the variation to reduce the on-site parking, but they did recommend an amendment to the PUD with the variations that I described and the conditions that are listed in the report. The transmittal sheet does not reference that their approval includes an amendment to the PUD, but it really should, so I just want to make that point and clarify that. It was in the original variation that they denied, but it was not in the one that they approved. I do have other slides here I'm happy to use to answer any questions, but I thought I'd keep it short, given the petitioner gave a lengthy presentation.
Thanks, Charles. Just one follow-up on the question that the petitioner raised. We don't have any hybrid designation where it's half medical, half office, so that it would be a reduced requirement. It's either medical or it's general office.
Correct.
There's nothing in between.
That's correct.
Okay. And it's pretty clear in our code what a definition of a medical use is.
Yes.
Okay. Trustee Scaletta.
Thank you. For the record, my general practitioner is out of this office. And parking lot's always crowded. So there's no doubt about that, and I've been there at different times of the day. And I appreciate everything that you've gone through and giving us your presentation today. Explain to me what the process is going to be of who those 20 people that are going to park at Our Savior.
Those are primarily employees.
I got that they're employees.
Yes.
What's the system? Which 20 employees are parking there on what days?
That I am not familiar with or aware of the specifics. We have worked with the tenant to ensure that they are making their staff aware that they have to go to park at the church, and so there's a designated number of people. I did not have an opportunity to go and discuss with them the specifics of who and what schedules and all of that. They know that they have the ability to park over there. There's a certain number of people who do park over there and use the parking for that purpose to open up the spaces on site. The same thing with Glucker. So no, I do not have the specifics or the method or the assignment, or if there's a list that is made. There's an understanding with staff. There are a certain number of individuals. Probably, I would say, the least ranking individuals get to park off-site, whereas the more senior people, the physicians, they might get to park on-site. Okay. But no, there's no given process that we're aware of.
See, and that's what's bothering me about this whole program, is that it's great that you have 20 spaces over at Our Savior, and it's great that you have 12 at Gluckert, but my concern is that you have these arrangements, and that only until parking is kind of, really, is growing on the space or on the site, and all of a sudden, people are coming in complaining that there's no parking, that people are then going to move. I'm looking for a system. I'm looking for that,
And to the extent that a system could be, encourage or the staff and that the tenant could be informed that they actually have to have a list. My belief is that there is a process, that certain people always park there. It's not a need type of thing. People go and park there and they wait for the shuttle. If they go to Our Saviors, they wait for the shuttle, they pick them up and they bring them to the facility, and then at the end of the day or at the end of their shift, because the van and the shuttle is on site, it will take them back to the, they'll be driven over to their spot and then they leave. So there is a system. I don't have the names, I don't have all the details, but it's not as if we get there in the morning, we park there, we realize that the parking lot is too busy, and then we go over to the off-site parking. No, it is used on a daily basis. But we certainly could encourage and give them more direction to use a specific process and something that the village would
So
satisfy.
there's three tenants in this building, right?
Correct. Well, there's there's two arms of one tenant and the eye doctors.
Okay.
Yes.
So who's using the 20 spaces?
The 20 spaces are being used by the medical offices, not the eye doctor. The eye doctor doesn't really have enough staff, and they park on the street on Maud.
Okay.
At least my understanding of the discussions that I did have. Because the Northwest Health folks are the ones who park on the off-site spaces.
Because I think the goal is that you're supposed to be parking everybody on your site. We don't
Certainly,
want 'em-
yes.
We don't want them going into the neighborhood. It's all residential around
That is
here.
correct.
Okay, so that's again, then maybe some of those people that are parking on Maud belong in Gluckert.
It's possible, yes.
I think that you have a lot here. I just think that you don't have enough detail that is making me comfortable that there's a process in place and that this isn't just, let's find a way to make sure that we're compliant with the village so that we can move forward. And then you're going to be gone, and we're going to have to deal with Northwest Community and go, something's not right here. You guys are still spilling out into the neighborhood. People are complaining that when they come here. I mean, I don't know who that person would be that would call the village and complain when they get over there to see a doctor and that there's not a space for them.
And if I may add that,
Sure.
Certainly, to the extent that conditions are being placed, and this is the place for those conditions to be placed, to the extent that that the board would want to have a condition that specifically requires a plan that has to be there and something that would have to be submitted to the staff so that they could be satisfied, and contact persons have been added. So I believe that's something that could be clarified, in order to address your concerns or the board's concerns regarding the parking requirements. One thing that I should say is that the parking issues that when parking might have gone into the neighborhood area, that's something that goes many years back. It is because of that, around 2010, which is what our information revealed in speaking with the chief operating officer of the church, that's when the arrangement started. And at the public hearing, we had one resident who indicated that had been resolved and that what she was looking for was to make sure that it didn't go back to what it was, because the parking issues on the neighborhood didn't appear to be an issue anymore. She wanted to make sure that it stayed the way it was, or the way that it has been over the last few years.
Okay. I'm very familiar with this property and with Maud and Arlington Heights Road.
Mm-hmm.
When you have people parking on both sides of Maud and you're coming up to Arlington Heights Road, whether you're going to go north or you're going to go south, there's a lot of turning vehicles there. And when you have all these people parking on the street, for 8 hours at a time, it's not necessary. It kind of makes that area congested.
You can only park on the one side of Maud, I believe, right in front of the building. So I think that's
and maybe that's part of the problem is that people are in violation, and I can't blame it all on your tenants. But I still think that I need a little bit more from you guys that you have some kind of system set up. This van driver, what hours does he work, or she?
The van driver is available during the business hours because they will shuttle the employees.
Okay. I'm just having a really difficult time. I mean, what does that mean? He's there. Is he an Uber driver?
It's an employee of Northwest Medical.
Okay.
They have their van. They provide this individual for the convenience of the employees who park off-site so that they don't have to walk there. They can be driven since it's a little bit of a ways.
Right. Absolutely. No, that's fantastic. I commend it. I'm just trying to understand where that person is the rest of the day. That's just somebody that maybe works out of the hospital?
My understanding is that he is available the entire time he's there. And because the use is primarily for employees who need the vehicle during the shift changes or hours of operation, that's when he's definitely available. But it's never been, my understanding from discussions with the tenants is that they manage it well enough that it's a non-issue.
Okay. I want to help you. I just don't know that you're helping me get to a point where I feel comfortable with this process, because your answers are just so vague in general.
And part of that has to do with the fact that this, the information that we provided to staff and working through the process, they found it to be sufficient. Certainly, as I've indicated, to the extent that the board and Trustee Scaletta do you want to have more specific plan, is something that can be added to a condition for the ordinance, and that can be submitted to staff for its satisfaction to make sure that your concerns are being addressed.
So what I'm not trying to do is create additional bureaucracy. All I want is for you to be able to answer these questions, and you'd be on record, and I would believe you because you're here to tell the truth. Mm-hmm. The problem is that you don't have anything, and so me putting another variation of creating another level of paperwork that's going to have to shuffle back and forth and staff approve, and I just wish that there was a plan, and it doesn't sound like there's a plan other than that you guys have parking spaces available and that there is a driver that can pick people up when he's called. It's of concern to me. It's just so close to residential that this could only get worse, in my opinion.
Trustee Glasgow.
Thank you very much. I have some of the same concerns. I see one of the doctors in this building on a regular basis, and when no matter which direction I come, if I come down through the neighborhoods and go down Maud, it's packed. And I know, Dr. Wood over on the end, the eye doctor, has probably 10 and maybe 11 employees in there. I don't know how many of them are parking on Maud, but that's, another story. The parking lot itself is really tight to get in and out of to begin with. And, if you've got a bigger car or you've got an older person that's parking in and out of there, and, sometimes people with eye problems, they can't see as well as they should. Sometimes parking is a little difficult, especially the way that's designed. It's the parallel parking, or it's the parallel stalls that you got to pull straight into, as opposed to at an angle. So it makes it, the way you've got that U-shape, makes it really difficult for some patrons to get in and out. I just have some concerns on where's the van's going to be sitting when, is it back over at the hospital? Is it staged somewhere?
No, the van actually sits on the property. It's on the south side of it, close to,
Okay.
It's one of the last spots.
The van park is
went
parked
by
right
there, you
there
see
today.
it. I'm sorry.
The van was parked right here today. As I understand, the van stays on the premises. I also understand that the employee is an employee that works in this building, but we would need to get that confirmed in writing, but that's what we've been led to believe.
Okay. So is it only going to operate during the shift change, or are you only going to have your employees parking out in certain areas? Or what happens if you end up having all of those spaces taken up? And I have to be honest with you, it does. My concern is it's 77 spaces now. If you end up, adding other business into there, one of my concerns is that you get. And you're chomping at the bit. I see how. I promise I'll let you answer.
No, I want to hear you out.
Is that if it gets tight and you get those parking situations like I've seen personally when you go over there, then it takes up 2 spaces, and now you're down X number of spaces. I've also come down Evergreen at times where you've got parking that's backed up down Evergreen, and you take that turn, and fortunately or unfortunately, that's the way I go to get from my office to this particular building. I don't always take Arlington Heights Road because of the convenience factor of getting from point A to point B, so I see the traffic that's backed up. What are you guys going to do? Are you going to have a restriping? Are you going to end up trying to maximize the parking lot? How are you going to do this?
Well, I do believe that the 77 spaces on site will remain the 70 spaces on site. They're not, it just would be prohibitive to do anything else. You couldn't make them smaller because then it would become more of an issue. You couldn't make them larger because then you're running out of those spaces. Obviously, when it was designed back in '89, the 77 spaces were appropriate. Certainly, we have folks now who have bigger vehicles, and that might be somewhat of an issue. But there is no proposal or any plan to change the current configuration. The reason for the off-site parking arrangements that we have with Glucker and with our Savior is to address that specific issue, the parking issue. And based on the numbers and the parking studies that have been conducted, those numbers are sufficient. The parking studies also revealed that there, at least during the times when it was observed, there was no parking on Evergreen. There might have been parking on Maud, but those are actual parking spaces that can be used. And there's no specific restrictions as to the amount of time that those are used. So it is being complied with, in the sense the on-street parking is being complied with. As of our parking studies, the requirements are being satisfied with respect to the number of parkings. There may be times during the day where it might be a little bit more peak, and it might be a little bit busier, but certainly is still within the numbers that we have. And so what we attempted to do through the parking studies was to show that the loads of parking for the applicable times were consistent, and the parking spaces available through on-site, through Glucker, through our Savior were sufficient.
In your defense, I mean, I've gone at all times of the day, and I've never seen the parking lot full, but if there's going to be improvements to this building, or you're going to get additional business, or it's going to change the nature of this, then that's something that I have to be concerned about for the future.
The conditions are, while loft space was designed for 4,700 square feet,
right,
the loft space, one of the conditions is to limit and no further improvement.
Yeah, you're talking
So
about the
we are
meeting
kind
room.
of built out as far as we're going to go, and there will be no additional.
You're talking about the meeting room that you described in
The upstairs,
paper.
right.
Okay.
So that part of the condition is that we can't build anymore. We have the square footage that we have, and that is it. So there would not be any further impact on the parking requirements. So, and to the extent that medical being the most intensive use or parking requirement, obviously we can't go further. We can go higher. We can go there's not going to be any change in requirements. If the property owner at some point in time went office, then obviously the parking requirements would decrease, and we would be okay.
Mr. Perkins, I think, was the number 71 the max that they saw in this particular area?
Yes, that was the peak count at 1:30 p.m. on a Tuesday in January. So this chart, kind of the reds, almost like a radar chart, show the highest intensity of parking uses, and the greens the lowest. So the peak times are typically, in the afternoon, 1 to 3:30, and also in the morning, 10:30 to probably noon. The other times of the days, they're lower from the demand that we've seen on these parking counts.
Okay.
Staff also went out at different days and didn't do a full count, but observed similar situation.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I know that you're not reaching capacity at this point. I think that Trustee Scaletta makes a real good point. I'd like to see a more cohesive plan as to your parking. I don't have an objection per se to it. I have some real concerns, and I'd like to see those concerns answered before I end up, voting in favor of the amended recommendation, so to speak. But I'll sit and listen. I'm sure my colleagues have some questions of you.
And we certainly would be willing to provide, something before you vote. I'm certainly, certain that we can speak with the tenant to make sure that there's a more specific, if there isn't already a plan that I'm just not familiar with, that could be provided for your consideration as well.
Can I ask one more? Since we have you here, Nick, can I ask a question regarding, from the police perspective, having a van come in and out and in and out and in and out on one of the heaviest traveled roads in the village? Are you guys concerned at all from the van coming in, coming out, coming in, coming out? Have you thought about perhaps making this one way in and one way out, or how are we going to end up working with that?
We're always concerned with the movement of traffic, but I'm not familiar with Maud and Arlington Heights Road being that congested where a van moving throughout the day would rise to concern of an engineering issue that we need to put on the table.
And please forgive me, I don't recall, is there a pork chop there that you can only turn right with that van?
No, there's not.
There's not? Okay.
And, excuse me, can I just clarify?
Yeah.
When you leave the parking lot on the medical side, it's right turn only.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Right, so it's right in, right out.
Because that's how I leave, so that's
The
what.
only place that you could turn left would be is if you went up to Maud. and
Maud
that's
and
where I
then
was-
right.
That's where it gets,
Okay, so how do you end up structuring this so you have traffic coming in and out with a traffic flow that's not going to end up causing any problems in the long run? Because, I drive a boat. I can tell you, coming out onto Arlington Heights Road and making sure on a right turn, I'm not going left. I'm just trying to figure out how the van's gonna get out, get down. I mean, I can see how it gets to Gluckert. You could walk to Gluckert, but coming back, how do you get to the church without crossing traffic?
Use Evergreen Street and going through Maud, or you use Arlington Heights Road and access through Maud.
I understand the logistics of getting there. I'm just worried about.
It's a lot of movement. Yeah.
And how many times a day is this van going? Do you know?
It's primarily during the shift changes or schedule changes.
Thank
when
you, Nick.
people
I
need it.
appreciate
So,
it.
yes.
Trustee LaBedz.
Thank you. First, I have to ask Mr. Perkins a very basic question. We're here to talk about this because this building is for sale. It was recently sold. I really didn't get how this came about to bring to the level where we're going through this process.
So
I may be able to explain that. The current owner has owned the property since 2014. He was looking to put it on for sale. As part of the due diligence, the buyers looked into it and determined that there was an issue that
Okay.
had not been discovered prior, and the village became aware of it, and everybody was aware of it at that point in time.
Okay.
And so that's why we submitted the application.
Thank you, because
But
although
right
I
now
read
the-
everything and, everything, that didn't really come through, and especially, I would think people watching at home might have a little trouble understanding, why we're talking about this. So that's just the first question. With this shuttle, if it's always parked on the property, then we're really talking about 76 spaces that are usable, correct?
That would be correct, yes.
Any thought given to having the shuttle? I realize we're only talking one space, but having it park in this informal agreement on Glickerts to at least open it up for the clients of the medical facilities?
Well, I think that is primarily parked on site because that's when people are going to use it. They might just be able to get on it and go. If it were parked, particularly if the driver is an individual who works in the facility, he has to or she has to be there and be able to go to the off-site facility or the off-site parking spaces.
If there were no shuttle, and these off-site agreements existed, and especially the one at the church, would it not be possible to still encourage the employees to park there? Would they not park there unless they were actually driven? I mean, because personally, it's not that far.
And I agree with you, but I think it's for the purposes of folks that may not necessarily be able to walk, that distance, or, depending on the travel from home, they might have to come in at a certain hour. Those are just, I think that's a courtesy to the employees since the occupant can't provide parking on site, that this is a way of addressing the fact that, we have to park off-site, and I know it's inconvenient, but here's a way to address that and minimize the impact on the employees.
Okay. I, too, have utilized this facility, but my times I've gone have been late in the afternoon, and so there was a lot of parking available at that particular time, so I haven't experienced a bottleneck. I mean, there were still people parked on Maud. I don't know if they were for this building or for something else. It's as even came up with the staff report. It's impossible to tell who is parking on Maud, whether it's for an employee or a customer or something like that for this site. So.
One thing that I should add to, as part of the initial staff process, the departments are asked to submit reports.
Right.
The police department did not have any concerns or that we saw, and so that sort of led me to at least have the impression that it may not be a traffic issue associated with it because there weren't any complaints coming from the police department. Rather, we were talking through the engineering department and the feasibility of the parking configuration.
Right, because if there's cars there, it can be difficult for some
Yes.
cars to get through, just who are residents of the neighborhood to the west, or other people who are coming to the facility, or something else, some other facility that's right nearby. So I understand the concerns of my fellow trustees so far. but I am concerned. I wouldn't want this to be such that, you're concerned about not being able to use it for office. And is my understanding correct that you couldn't have, if you had a regular office in there and you had a medical office, wouldn't each use be counted for parking needs? That's how I understand it.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so if one of your medical tenants left, then the way it's written, if those agreements go away, those informal agreements go away, only an office would be allowed. Is that correct? I understand.
Until it met the parking requirements.
And
so because they are overparked for general office, they could have, say, one of the office suites, depending on the size, could be medical office and the other could be general office. And if when we run the formula on the parking requirements, it is 77 or less, then they could have that balance of some medical office and some general office.
Right, okay, that's how I thought it would work. All right, thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you.
Trustee Rosenberg.
Thank you. So, a question on the renewals for the leases. In many cases, leases automatically renew unless otherwise stated.
That would be correct.
So where you have a lease that potentially rolls over, let's say into a second 5-year period, and a week later you lose your parking agreement for some reason, how do you deal with a situation like that?
Well, I think that at that point in time, and trying to anticipate that how that might happen and the issues with the leases would be, again, to make sure that that it was communicated to the village what happened, that then the owner would attempt to secure whatever parking would be necessary in order to satisfy the requirements, and that would certainly be the goal. With respect to the leases, certainly the leases could be amended to make sure that that is something that is a component, so there's an awareness of those of the requirements, so that you can try to address it to make sure, because obviously what the root of the problem is that at some point in time we got tenants here who were medical and there was no communication with anybody. The goal would be to try to avoid that from happening and to be cognizant of the issues with the parking and the requirements and the off-site agreements, that those would have to be maintained. I had offered as an additional condition to make sure that there was some sort of notice requirement that would have to be addressed for staff, and that it could be addressed by staff to make sure that everybody stayed on top of it and to avoid this kind of thing from happening again and any of the other parking issues that we may have.
Yeah, I think
So certainly the owner is willing to, however, in whatever method works, to make sure that it remains code compliant to do that. Because it's the building, it's the property, it's a use that has been placed for a number of years. The property's been developed now for 25 plus years, so it's not going anywhere.
I mean, if I were obviously the tenant and I had a condition in there that said I couldn't, have a lease that was valid once you were non-compliant, I'm not sure I would be signing a lease
Well,
like that.
I agree that that's a concern, and it's a concern for the property owner that they need, if they're going to enter into leases, they have to be able to maintain their obligations on the leases. I'm sure that the tenants would want to make sure that they had the ability to do whatever was necessary to get the enjoyment of the lease. And so whatever it needs to be done in order to ensure that, we certainly would, while at the same time remaining code compliant.
So you currently don't have a formal agreement with Our Savior's Lutheran Church?
It is not a formal agreement by virtue of the fact that they are being a good neighbor, that they make the space available because they have it and they have plenty of it, and it's just a neighbor relationship. I believe that the tenant does provide a small donation to the church. And it certainly would not be the kind of thing that you would want to have as an agreement, because that may have some impact on their exempt status because they're drawing revenue from rental of the space. So I think it's the reason why this has been kept informal.
Right. Okay. But I think in absence of having that agreement, I think, we've required that of certain people in the past as far as on different properties. And so I think behooves us, I think, as the village to have a formal agreement. You can have a formal agreement that doesn't have a value to
Valued,
it.
correct.
And it wouldn't affect their status as
And
far
I,
as that
and I,
goes.
and I do believe from speaking with Jim over at the church that he was willing to, do whatever was necessary, along the same kind of components. I don't think that there was any specific requirement that it can only be informal.
So, Charles, as far as from the standpoint of, I think it behooves us to have that agreement, I think, in place prior to giving this approval as far as that goes. And the same thing, I think, at the same time, we should require of the petitioner to have a formal plan with the employers of the employees who are using the outside lots to, make sure that they're performing to what they're supposed to with parking off-site.
If I could jump in,
Sure.
we do have documentation of the arrangement between the church and the petitioner.
When you say documentation.
We have a letter from the church that confirms that this arrangement exists, but because of the issues that the petitioner raised in terms of it being a church and a non-for-profit, they don't necessarily want to have a formal arrangement. But from staff's perspective, as long as there's documentation, formal confirmation that can be confirmed at any time we could go to the church and say, does this arrangement still exist? That satisfies us from that standpoint. We from our perspective, don't see any further benefit to getting an agreement as long as we can formally have documentation that confirms the arrangement.
Okay, because the documentation we received said it was an informal one, and so I didn't know what that meant, so.
Yeah, there's a lot of materials, Trustee Rosenberg, but there is a letter in the packet from the church, and it says that Northwest Community Healthcare uses their parking lot for overflow parking. They're allowed to use up to 20 spaces. It's open-ended. Since they first entered into it, they've only not been able to park there twice. And I forget the time period that they've had this in place, but one was when they were repaving the parking lot, resurfacing it, and the other was when they had a very large funeral. And those are the only two occasions that they haven't been able to allow them to park there. They're not allowed to park there on the weekends, just Monday through Friday. And they do also indicate that they use their own passenger van to shuttle the employees from their parking lot to the medical facility. We do have a lease or a letter lease from Gluckert. It is 30-day cancelable. So neither of them are in perpetuity by any means.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Baldino.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, just in the interest of full disclosure, my primary care physician is out of this facility. I've been here at all times of the day, and I agree that this parking lot gets busy. But I also have never seen it full. I've always been able to find a spot. My question is, how many of the spots over at Gluckert are actually used? Do we know?
I do not know for certain how many are used. The goal is to use up, if they can use the 12, they'll use the 12, is my understanding. Because they have enough employees that they have to use them.
Okay, and so these spots are available to employees or employees and patrons?
Could be users too, but because it's right there. Obviously, given the proximity, they could use them. But they are primarily designed for employees.
Okay. Based on the issue that was raised last week, are there concerns about this parking lot being unusable due to flooding? We heard last week that this lot floods frequently. Is that something that's come up? Is it a concern?
No, not to our knowledge. I mean, the flooding's been a relatively recent phenomenon, but I mean, that's not something that we can take into consideration here where we've declared this parking lot unusable by a long shot. Obviously, Gluckert is a going concern and, manages itself well with multiple events. The fact that occasionally there's been some water, and like we said, these are things that we're actively working with the property owner on, so I would say no.
Okay. And just as a point of clarification, you know, the letter from Gluckert and the letter from Our Saviors are to NCH Medical, not to the property owner.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Both those agreements are with the tenant.
That is correct.
You know, I share some of my fellow trustees' concerns, but at the end of the day, I don't have a particular problem with this. Just so that point of view is shared.
If I may add one point to the reason why we have the tenant and those parking arrangements is because they predate ownership of my client. The arrangements go, at least for certain with Our Savior, go back to 2010, which is 4 years before my client purchased the property. And I believe that doctors who practice there own the building, and so they had the arrangement. And sort of, it was a matter of convenience to continue the relationship as it was, and it has worked. So that's why there hasn't been a change. The both Glucker and the church are willing to have our owners step into those agreements just to make sure that that's maintained if it's something that will further address the concerns of the village. And that is in process if that's something that has to be done.
Okay, I appreciate that
Yes,
sentiment.
and
Thank
that's
you.
the reason I brought it up, to
Thank
make sure that your concerns were addressed.
Trustee Blackwood.
Thank you, Mayor. We're talking about 32 spaces, 12 at Gluckert's, 20 at Our Saviors.
Correct.
And currently, those spots are supposed to be for employees' use, correct?
Yes.
Do you know right now if 32 employees are using spots off-site, or are they all parking together with the doctors on the current site?
I do not know that for certain. What I do understand is that it's overflow parking for the employees.
Sure.
My assumption would be, based on discussions that I've had and statements that have been made, is that they are used.
And the agreements that you have with the other two entities are typical of faith-based organizations with businesses, and certainly I can understand where Gluckert's would want to be a good neighbor. My feeling is that it's incumbent and in the best positioning of the doctors and the physicians there to make sure that their patients have parking, so I have no concern about this. We're talking about 32 additional spots. I don't believe that, given the opportunity of weather, for example, if you're at Our Saviors and your employees are parking there, it's nice to have a van. It's an 8-passenger van that's there all day long. I don't think there's a concern, and I certainly don't have one. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I also have no concern with the portion of this that the Plan Commission approved of, the second portion of this. And so I think what I've heard and what I've read in the minutes is that this solution has solved the problem in terms of the overflow parking into the residential neighborhood. And so I don't think we want to do anything that will damage the solution that they've come up with. And so this, really, the second portion of this just memorializes it. It grants them the authority per village code to, by variation, to have these off-site facilities in a residential district. So I'm 100% in concurrence with the Plan Commission recommendation of those, and I don't think we should be doing anything to impede their agreements with these other entities, which apparently has solved the problem.
Appreciate that.
Trustee Scaletta.
So Charles, just to make sure that we have our I's dotted and T's crossed, because normally when a petitioner comes forward, they're usually the ones that have the agreements, and I understand why they don't, for a variety of reasons. Are you aware of there being any language in any of the leases that require them to comply with this plan that's out there, that the employees are parking off-site as much as possible?
Because the petitioner is the property owner, we actually don't have the individual leases for the tenants. We've been informed on the term of them, but we don't have the actual leases.
Okay. it's like making this vote, you just gotta have a lot of hope and faith that everything that you've said tonight is 100% accurate and isn't just stuff that you believe.
I'm an officer of the court, so I need to make sure that I'm being truthful when I tell you.
And
My understanding is that the leases do not specifically address the parking because that is a zoning issue that they were not aware of when they were made. This parking issue and the concerns that have been brought go back to just last year in October, when it was first determined that there were some violations or there were non-compliance with the code with respect to the parkings. So everything that has been done since then, including this petition and this process, has been for this effort of trying to address that. The leases predated
I understand, but
those issues, so they don't necessarily
you can make an
address it.
amendment to a lease, right?
Oh, certainly we can.
Okay.
And,
Well,
and
I just feel like this is a very loose thing that we have going on. We don't have the petitioner who has the agreements. Nothing's in the leases.
it is by virtue of the
I'll
fact
just-
of how this developed. Had we been aware of all these issues and had the time to go through the process and remain and become compliant, obviously we would have done all of those things. The commitment that we are making and my client is making is to address it as part of the process. We wanted to become compliant. We wanted to come to the village as soon as we could, and it did take some time because there was a need to go through documents and understand the root of the problem. And what we have done is exactly that. I would like to think that my client has been cooperative and staff has been wonderful to work with, and we've really tried to make sure that we address this in a way that satisfies staff, that satisfy our client, the tenants, the neighbors. We went through the process, as well as the Glucker and the church, who've been helpful, in providing the information that they have provided with respect to the use of the
Right, but
parking.
in all reality, I mean, your client can't not try and sell the building unless he gets this resolved as well, correct?
That's also the case, yes. I'm not going to, there's no need to deny that, yeah.
Okay, well,
Sure.
all right.
Okay, well, I think some of the concerns about the vagueness, the lack of concreteness of the agreements is satisfied, at least in my mind, by condition number 4. So if those agreements went away, condition number 4 addresses that the petitioner would then have a requirement to get new agreements. Otherwise, their parking requirements would be reduced. Mr. Reckloff.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to say, perhaps to try to put the board's mind at ease. I mean, I think looking at this simplistically, what we're requiring here is that they have the X number of spaces. And, what we've done is create a condition saying you have to be able to demonstrate that you have access to X number of spaces, period. And I think, while I think it's important to understand the context of how the spaces are being used and, for curiosity's sake, to make sure that this is sufficient, really that's the question at hand is, are the appropriate number of spaces present for this user? Obviously, if it gets to be really obtuse or difficult to use, that's going to have an impact on the petitioner and their ability to lease, find tenants. But and it's easy enough to track when there is a change in tenant, if that impacts the number of parking spaces, and then for us to again reconfirm how many spaces they have available, and that may be a moving target over time. But I mean, that's the way that staff looked at it, fairly simplistically and directly on this, because I think you probably could go through this and look at this a lot of different ways, but I think, when we look at the plain language of the code, that's what's required, and that's the way that staff handle it.
Okay, thank you. Just for the board's reminder, there are 2 requests for variations. The first was denied by the Plan Commission, and the second was granted. So if there was a motion to concur with the Plan Commission recommendations, we would be denying the first and granting the second.
Can I just throw in something clarification? In fact, the Plan Commission had a motion to deny the amendment to the PUD, but in fact, we do want the PUD amended if the board's going to grant the variation the second level.
So what would be
So the motion would be to approve an amendment to PUD Ordinance 89-100 and grant the variation, the second variation, which is permitting the excess parking to be in a residential district and further than 1,000 feet with the conditions.
Okay, is that clear to everybody? Sorry for making it confusing.
It's up, the Plan Commission didn't actually vote to recommend approval of a PUD amendment, but the motion would be to approve a PUD amendment and the following variation with the conditions.
Okay. What's the will of the board?
Is there anybody from the public who wants to speak on this?
We don't have any blue cards. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the board on this item? Seeing none.
Then I'd make a motion to approve the PUD amendment and concur with the Plan Commission. I think you've outlined a lot of the concerns that I had with regard to this, and I agree there's a bit of trust that goes both ways, but I think you've answered my questions with regard to your discussions with my colleagues. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Motion by Trustee Glasgow. Is there a second?
Second.
By Trustee Baldino. Any further questions or comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Good luck to you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
All right. No other new business. We move on to the report of the village manager. Mr. Ecklas, anything?
Nothing this evening.
All right. And petitions and communications from the board. Trustee Blackwood.
I do have one comment that I'd like to share with the village staff and also those individuals that are listening. We are very aware in this village of how important first responders are, and certainly our public works employees as well. And I don't know if it was a really positive experience personally, but it wasn't a good situation that happened. Yesterday in the afternoon, we had a lot of heavy winds in the north part of town where I live, and I have been one of those individuals that have always been very caring of my emerald ash trees, and so I've had those inoculated for the last probably 3 cycles. And when the winds came through yesterday, about 3 o'clock, one of the big limbs of the ash, which is a 40-year-old ash, actually started to crack, and then it went down over the sidewalk and onto my driveway and covered my car, and so I got some scratches and bumps on the car. And when I went out, I said, well, I can't get out of the drive. So I called the regular number for the police department. They contacted Public Works, and they said, not a problem, it's a shift change right about now, we'll send somebody over. 15 minutes later, Public Works had a truck there, and the gentleman that was there was great. He just said, this is too big of a job for me. And so he said, but I'm going to sit here and I'll wait till the bigger truck that had the chipper and everything else come through. And there was another truck that came that had, and it took about 3 hours to get this accomplished. So they had a chipper, and then they had the truck that had the movable boom truck. Okay, see, that's something I didn't know. But the long and the short of it is, on Sunday afternoon, one of the hottest days of the year, when people are with their families, within a 3-hour period, the limb was taken care of. I was showing the mayor just how large this limb was. They had to winch it up and haul it into the truck and start, shredding it. And I was just amazed at how positive the individuals were when they came to the house. And so was my husband. He didn't think anybody would be happy to be there on a hot afternoon. But I just wanted to congratulate Scott Shirley. I did earlier, but I wanted to let you know, Manager Recklaus, and also Mayor Hayes, because I think it's important that we appreciate the men and women who work for us. And this was really a wonderful, positive story to share. So,
thanks, Carol. It's a good story. And just to conclude, we are in the middle of a seemingly endless 4th of July holiday with the 4th falling in the middle of the week. But we've had a great start with Frontier Days and the fireworks at the racetrack last night. So I just wanted to thank, on behalf of the board, all the red shirts, all the volunteers at Frontier Days, the support personnel from the village and the Park District, and especially Arlington Park for another tremendous fireworks display. I think is the best anywhere in the Chicagoland area. I think for those of us who were there can attest to that. I think the ground is still shaking from the finale. And so thanks to all, and hope everyone has a safe and very happy 4th of July holiday.
And Mr. Mayor, I just ask if people at home are going to the festival to walk Arlington and follow the signs over to the festival, kind of cut down on parking and congestion.
All right, thank you. If nothing further, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
By Trustee Glasgow, seconded by Trustee Scaletta. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all for joining us tonight.